Automated Creative are on a mission to reinvent advertising using artificial intelligence. We're a small team of startup folk who are really changing the way that advertising works. In the last few years, we've worked with brands like Adidas, Samsung, Diageo, Reckitt, KFC, Pernod Ricard, Bose, Unilever, GSK, Mondelez, the list goes on. And we are looking for account management talent. So if you know anyone who is kind of obsessed with creativity, ads, AI, and account management, if you could get them to email Rhoda at automatedcreative.net. That's Rhoda, RHODA, at automatedcreative.net. And I will love you forever. On with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I'm on a call with Rob Bullough, who is Director, Global Brand Marketing at Electronic Arts. I was introduced by Rob by the Future Conference. So Rob, for anyone who's listening to this podcast who doesn't know who you are and what you do, can you give the audience a bit of an overview?
I can. Hey, Tom. So as you say, my role at EA is Director of Global Brand Marketing or Management. It seems to be relatively interchangeable. And ultimately my role it sort of starts upstream. So kind of figuring out what it is that motivates our player to play our games. And indeed what they expect from us as a brand, and being able to articulate that in a way in which excite other teams so that they can develop products which will make sense to that player, both in terms of what they're looking for from us as a brand, but also, what they want generally from gaming. And then ultimately going downstream to help our communication teams figure out how to talk about it as well. So that's more or less the way my role is constructed at EA. I began my career after leaving school. Tried art school for a bit, but didn't last very long. I think I did about half a foundation year before realizing that it wasn't. I don't know. I guess I just wanted to go and get a job and go and do some stuff. I was done with education, which more or less became a bit of a blueprint for me, for the rest of my life, because I put a lot more, for good or bad, better or worse, I put a lot more credit in learning things myself as opposed to being taught things. I'm not very good at being taught things, but I really, really love to fail and learn shit myself. So that's kind of guided thinking. So anyway, I suppose I got really lucky, actually, if I'm truly honest, because the internet was becoming a thing, and I found myself, after working in numerous shops. I was actually at Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus for many years, but I eventually got myself a job working at a broadcaster and convinced them to let me design a website, which I'd learned because I used to throw parties, like in old warehouses in and around London, and had figured out how to use Photoshop and all kinds of other tools in order to build websites. And so said, hey, I can do that. And eventually they let me have a go, and then that became my job, which was fun. I learned a whole bunch of stuff. I was around some really exciting people, and then ultimately got a little bit bored of that. And music is, hence the parties in and around London. Music's always been a big part of my life. So at one point I just decided to kind of eject that career in design and go and follow music instead. So I was a professional musician for, I guess, about 4 years. Which actually is the way I met EA, because they were looking for somebody to do a soundtrack to Need for Speed Carbon. And I knew a guy who I'd done some work with on some other projects. And so he now was at EA. And anyway, so I ended up doing the title track and a number of other tunes for Need for Speed Carbon. And I guess, gosh, I don't even know how long ago that was. Maybe 18 years or something like that ago. And then that kind of ran its course, because ultimately the problem is I love music too much. I like making it. And so writing it to brief was kind of killing me a little bit. So I decided I needed to do something else, which it kind of had to be sort of tied to design or something which at least I had some kind of record of experience with. And this is around the time when, Flash was a thing. For anybody out there who remembers Flash, you probably all hate Flash, but I decided I wanted to learn Flash, and so I got into programming. So I taught myself how to program, and went back into the role of working within kind of digital creatives in order to build Flash experiences for people, which eventually landed me a job at an ad agency, and there I had a lot of fun actually being around some people who were crazy smart, like way better at stuff than I was, and I learned a lot about a lot of things, and eventually kind of transitioned away from programming and more into just being a general creative. But along the way, like working with loads of different brands, and particularly Nike, was one of our clients, I learned a whole ton of stuff, which actually fundamentally changed the way I perceived brands, because I've always been kind of interested in building brands, building my own brands, building myself as a company when I was a musician, and indeed, like when I was running these parties. And so there was always this kind of desire to create things which were meaningful to people. And I suppose that was what I ended up chasing when I eventually continued talking to EA, and eventually found myself actually working at EA full time on a brand, in the position of trying to build this brand up. And this is this sub brand of Need for Speed, which is one of our big video games, called Speed Hunters. And that was a pretty interesting journey, which eventually resulted in me transitioning into a full brand marketing, brand management position at EA, looking after Need for Speed and a number of other different things. And so, I missed out a fair few things along the way there, but I guess the kind of general journey that I followed is one of just, I don't know, like as soon as things get a little bit dull or plateau or get a bit uninteresting, I've kind of voraciously tried to learn a new skill and then gone after that. But I never really had a kind of a blueprint or a plan, but I guess I found myself here and now doing brand marketing. And this feels the most right of anything that I've ever done, because it's definitely the culmination of all that experience. Now, all of it is incredibly useful for the work that I do at EA. So
it must be a terrible client. It must be so annoying. Well, when I was a designer.
I am the absolute
well, actually,
worst.
when I was a creative, when I used to write music,
mate.
Whoa, that's going to be tough to argue with.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying your job, and you're not handing your notice in on a podcast, although that would be entertaining in its own right. But a couple of quick questions for you. In that quilt of a career, that's a weird thing to say. Anyway, you know what I'm trying. It's patchwork quilt of a career.
Well, let's go with that.
What's the best thing you've spent your own money on that you use for work?
So it's actually a book that I bought when I was doing the music, and I realized that it was killing my love of music. I was like, oh shit, I need a new thing to do. And I kind of got interested in programming because I suppose I've always been interested. My dad was an engineer, so I suspect I've got a bit of that brain. Programming was kind of pulling me in, but the only programming I'd really done was relatively basic stuff. And anyways, when ActionScript 3 came out, which was this, I don't know, the next step in the programming language for Flash, they introduced object-oriented programming. And so I figured, well, I should probably figure out what on earth that is. It sounds cool, so I should probably find out about it. Anyway, so I bought this book called Design Patterns in ActionScript. I think it was called, something along those lines. Anyway, but the content of that book was explaining these, it would approach programming as you creating these living systems, by writing code. You're creating these living systems which are made up of all these various different pieces. And it introduced a whole load of really interesting language to me around things like encapsulation. So basically the idea that you can kind of issue one command from one place, and then a number of things can react to that in turn, but without you having to tell them explicitly what they need to do, because you've defined their behavior in advance. And the more I got into understanding these patterns, the more I started to see, similarities between that and things in nature, the way biology works, the way human systems work, the way that independently all this mad shit happens inside of our bodies. And these cells they have explicit knowledge of what they're supposed to be doing. And I've really found this book like incredibly fascinating because it was more or less offering programming to its readers in that form. And object-oriented programming, those of you who are programmers will know this is not something which was invented by Flash. It's just a way that certain programming languages are used. But it was new to me, and I suppose I bring it up because I've retained that. I guess that framework of looking at systems beyond programming. So I still think about things in terms of systems. So now when I look at brands, I think about them as a complete living system, which requires very, very similar patterned thinking as does proper object-oriented programming. So it was a real milestone for me in terms of learning stuff, and it's super applicable way beyond programming. I mean, I haven't programmed anything in years, but I still very much use the principles that book taught me for loads of different other things, which is, kind of cool.
So what is your go-to top marketing tip that you always find yourself sharing with your team or anyone who's prepared to listen?
Yeah, well, there's some people listen, but they get bored pretty quick. Either that or I happen to hook them in with something which is kind of vaguely interesting. But for me, it's just you don't know anything. You're wrong most of the time. The reality is that, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I would never really recommend you read any marketing books, because they're all bullshit the moment they're printed. I don't really truly believe that there's some certain kind of key, psychological human insights which hold relatively true, which are worth us all kind of understanding. I'm not going to trot them out because I'm not even sure I can bring any to mind. But I suppose the thing that I'm always excited by is learning that I'm wrong, and that we've been doing it wrong. Because as society moves forwards, the way people make decisions about what they're going to buy changes every single day. The channels they tune into, the things that influence them, everything changes so much from hour to hour, from season to season, from year to year, that all of our knowledge is useful in the sense that we can use it to do the next thing a little bit better. But we sure as shit don't have methods which are necessarily solutions that are evergreen. And so yeah, like continue to remind ourselves that we're wrong for the most of the time, and to challenge ourselves to find out and to test our theories that we believe to be correct, regardless of the fact that it might have worked a week or two ago, is, I think, an incredibly important part of being a successful marketer.
Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free.
So we're roughly at the halfway stage now. So we are going to talk about your shiny new object, which is pressure, which doesn't seem that shiny new to me, but over to you to tell the audience why you've chosen pressure as your shiny new object and why you think it represents the future of the industry.
Cool. Yeah. So I think that I chose it because it's relatively abstract. And it's something which kind of hit me in the face a little bit once again, kind of through musical means. So it probably helps if I kind of explain what had me arrive at this. And so I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been ADE a bunch of years ago. And I think it might have been Arme, who's like a sort of tech house DJ, I suppose, and also an incredible musical force, was DJing at some club. I remember very few details apart from this moment. But anyway, let's say Armin was playing. It was some kind of crazy hour in the morning, and his set was utterly fantastic. But there was this moment where he dropped a record, and it was, I don't know whether it was slightly out of key or it was like it was perfectly mixed with the previous record, but it was something was slightly wrong about it. And it was really, really fascinating that, I mean, anybody who's spent any time in dance clubs will know what I'm talking about. When a DJ has cast a spell on a room of people who are all loving it, and then suddenly that spell is broken by a bad mix or the wrong track or whatever it happens to be. And then suddenly all that magic is gone. And what I felt at that moment was this profound sense that the pressure had kind of left the room, that Ame had managed to produce this extreme pressure where there was nothing else existed in that room other than this spell that he'd kind of cast upon the audience. There was no anything else. And the moment he kind of put that next record on, suddenly everyone woke up, the pressure vanished. And I was just thinking, wow, shit, it's gonna take you a while to build that pressure back up again. You can't just switch it back on again. Similar to the way in which you'd fill pressure, in any kind of chamber, you need to do the same thing, as a DJ for an audience. Anyways, this kind of haunted me for a little bit, like for a few more weeks. And then I started to realize that actually this is super applicable to the way in which I think about brands, in the sense that we, as brand marketers, if our success is, as far as I'm concerned, entirely reliant on us being able to build some form of platform which represents us as a brand. So we have a very clear understanding what it is that our brand represents. And so we can kind of broadcast this abundantly clear signal so that people understand exactly what it is that we stand for, and so what they can expect from us. But that's not really enough. We then need to start to build this pressure, so that whatever channel it is that we've chosen that we exist in, that we start to build pressure through our actions. And I suppose this is where that kind of object-oriented approach starts to come in, where you can start to find ways to it's not just about being consistent, but it's about creating that spell, where this is kind of relentless wave of brand signal coming from us, where it all ties up, it all ladders towards the same thing, and we can develop our position with our audiences without ultimately dropping that pressure through whether it be one key cut or death by 1,000 wounds. They're both going to ultimately equal the same thing. By paying close attention to how and where we're going to be building that pressure, I think we can create really exceptional and exciting experiences for our audiences who choose to engage with us. But it relies, of course, upon building the correct foundations for the work, for the communication, for the product and everything else. So it all kind of ladders up to the same place. And if we haven't done that, we're not able to maintain the pressure. But nonetheless, it remains that I believe is a helpful way, at least this may be totally meaningless, but I do use this with my team and they're all on board. So unless I just happen to have a team who have just decided to drink this bizarre form of Kool-Aid that I've invented, I do find this an incredibly helpful concept to keep us on the rails and to keep us excited, more importantly, about the work we're doing. Because it's not just this kind of, it's not just about how do we increase engagement, or what are we doing for acquisition, or these kind of these meaningless garbage corporate words which aren't exciting, to talking in terms of maintaining a pressure and building a system which allows us to contribute towards it, for me, makes the work a lot more exciting and actually gives us a focus, which makes it kind of tangible and electric.
So who do you think does pressure well?
I think that there's brands who have distinct focus on a kind of ruthless pursuit of, ruthless is probably a wrong word because that sounds a bit savage, but like nonetheless a pursuit and a true understanding of who they are and where they come from. And I find that it's mostly brands which have founders who are still in control. Because I did think about this a little while recently when we were doing a teardown of a bunch of different brands who we felt were important inspirations. Because you have to remember, well, it's worth noting that as a brand, manager, brand director, brand leader of some sort, most of our job is actually evangelizing the work that we've pulled together in order to get others to want to contribute to it too. So actually, whilst we do spend some time writing, most of the work is actually trying to work with people to get them excited about it as well. And so we recently did a bit of a teardown to try and understand what other brands out there could we use as references to help others understand, well, this is what good looks like. And like I say, I think that there's a UK cycling brand called Rafa, who I think do an incredibly good job of presenting a consistent and exciting, compelling brand experience universe that you want to be a part of. It's magnetic, kind of draws you in and doesn't appear to kind of drop the ball ever. Their consistency is really, really compelling, no matter where they are, whether that be on YouTube, whether it be in their product films or whether it be in their lookbooks, it's consistent. And actually, going even bigger than that, you get brands like Nike, and I suspect that it's probably boring and annoying to hear Nike being name checked again, but nonetheless, I felt so schooled by Nike when I spent a short time working with those guys. They have that consistency, that determination, and that fierce point of view, which is led by a founder's point of view, which I think it creates that infectiousness. So I think that RAF is a really good example. Some streetwear brands, I think, as well. You look at the work Supreme have done over the years to build that pressure around, every single time they open their mouths, it's like a vacuum. It just pulls in light, and that is due to their kind of diligence of knowing exactly who they are, what they stand for, and not really straying from that.
Unfortunately, we're at the end of the podcast now. So, Rob, if someone wants to get in touch with you for DJ gigs or for more chat about pressure or coding or design or all the other things you can do, how would you like them to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is the only social network which I have, so that's probably the best way to do it.
And what makes a really good LinkedIn outreach to you?
I suppose somebody once sent me an email, and I think the subject line was, I don't remember what it was, something about buying me a coffee, but the way they worded it was brilliant. So I suppose humor is probably the best way to do it. The telling me they're going to like maximize my reach and like dial up and get me a bajillion hits, it's probably not it. But showing that you're a human being and you've got something to offer is probably going to do it.
Rob, that's great advice. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That'd just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.